Jim Crockett Promotions, Inc., was a family-owned and operated professional wrestling promotion that existed for about 57 years of the 20th century. It was the direct forerunner to World Championship Wrestling, and was a powerful force within, and member of, the National Wrestling Alliance. History. Early history. In 1931, Jim Crockett, Sr., began promoting professional wrestling shows from his base of operations, Charlotte, North Carolina. Crockett also promoted other live events under the Jim Crockett Promotions banner. The business was incorporated in the 1950s. Although the business was always called Jim Crockett Promotions, it used a variety of pseudonyms as brand names for specific TV shows, newspaper and radio ads, and even on event tickets themselves. Among those brand names were the generic standbys, Championship Wrestling, and All-Star Wrestling, as well as East Coast Wrestling, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, Mid-Atlantic Championship Sports, Wide World Wrestling, and Worldwide Wrestling. Crockett joined the National Wrestling Alliance in 1952, and his territory covered Virginia, North Carolina and South Carolina. Crockett promoted shows in this region for 38 years, until his 1973 death, at which point Jim Crockett, Jr. took over. The name, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, became JCP's primary brand name in print, radio, and other advertising. 2 years later, JCP introduced the Wide World Wrestling brand name and television show. JCP used the Worldwide and Mid-Atlantic brands concurrently. Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling 1970s lead by the younger Crockett, and under the guidance of a new creative force, former wrestler turned match booker George Scott, the promotion moved away from generally featuring just tag teams, to primarily focusing on singles wrestling. By the early 1970s, JCP had gradually phased out its multiple weekly television tapings in such cities as Charlotte, North Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, and High Point, North Carolina, consolidating its production schedule into just one shoot, and then syndicating the broadcast to several local TV stations throughout the Carolinas and Virginia. In 1981, JCP moved to the WPCQ studios in Charlotte. The local shows hosted by announcers like Big Bill Ward and Charlie Harville gave way to Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. Mid-Atlantic was hosted by Bob Caudle. Caudle was joined by a rotation of co-hosts, before David Crockett became Caudle's permanent co-host, color commentary man. For a brief period, a secondary show, East Coast Wrestling, was taped at WRAL. It was basically a repackaged version of Mid-Atlantic, and was announced by Big Bill Ward. In 1975, JCP premiered a new, syndicated B-show, Wide World Wrestling. The original host of this show was former Georgia Championship Wrestling announcer Ed Caprell. Subsequent Wide World, Worldwide announcers included Les Thatcher, George and Sandy Scott, and Dr. Tom Miller. It was also hosted by the team of Rich Landrum and Johnny Weaver. In 1978, JCP later added a short-lived show, The Best of NWA Wrestling, which was taped at the WCCB studios in Charlotte and featured then-active wrestler Johnny Weaver sitting down with top stars in a coach's show format. Rich Landrum and David Crockett appeared on Best of doing promo interviews for local arena shows. JCP gradually began to expand, running shows in eastern Tennessee, parts of West Virginia, and even Savannah, Georgia. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, JCP ran regular shows in Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio. Crockett and Scott also bought minority shares of Frank Tunney's Toronto-based promotion, Maple Leaf Wrestling. Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling also aired on a Buffalo, New York station, enabling the Tunney, Crockett, Scott enterprise to bring a full slate of shows to Ontario and upstate New York. 1980s. In 1980, Jim Crockett Jr. was elected president of the NWA. In 1981, former Georgia Championship Wrestling booker Ole Anderson took over as Mid-Atlantic's booker. In 1981, Anderson booked both JCP and GCW simultaneously. In 1982, Crockett partnered with wrestlers Ric Flair and Blackjack Mulligan to start a secondary company out of Knoxville, Tennessee, Southern Championship Wrestling. The promotion featured such stars as Mulligan, his son Barry Windham, Kevin Sullivan, Wayne Ferris, the Mongolian Stomper, Terry Taylor, Tim Horner, and others. The enterprise lasted less than 1 year, however. By the 1980s, the U.S. pro wrestling industry was undergoing seismic and rapid change. The old NWA sanctioned system of separate, regional, territory promotions was collapsing under increasing competitive pressure from Vincent K. McMahon's World Wrestling Federation, itself a family-owned territory promotion, which aggressively expanded into a nationwide promotion. Crockett had similar expansion goals, envisioning an NWA united through JCP buying out or merging with all of its member regional territories. Ted Turner had realized the value of professional wrestling for cable television in the early 1970s. This was a smart move for Turner, as pro wrestling provided his then-fledgling channel a source of cheap live entertainment, well suited to TBS' target audience. At the time, Turner could run per-inquiry ads and take part of the sales profits just by providing the big viewing audience delivered by pro wrestling's loyal fan base. In 1982, Crockett ended his second year as NWA president. Turner's TBS had asked Georgia Championship Wrestling, Inc. to change its public brand name to World Championship Wrestling, helping fuel rumors that the Jim Barnett-controlled company would go national. Itself, Georgia Championship Wrestling acquiesced to the World Championship Wrestling name change in 1983. By 1983, JCP went from recording its weekly shows in a television studio, to shooting on location, in between matches at live arena events. Starrcade. In 1984, the WWF purchased a majority-controlling interest in Georgia Championship Wrestling from a number of its co-owners and Jim Barnett, thus gaining control of GCW's flagship, Saturday night time slot on the nationally seen TBS channel. This tactic, co-opting the time slots of rival territories in their own backyard local TV markets, was a part of the WWF's national expansion strategy. To Vince McMahon's surprise, this tactic backfired severely with TBS. Viewer backlash was intense, as the Southern viewership was incensed to see the beloved stars of their local show suddenly replaced, without advance notice, by an invading force of wrestlers from up north. TBS received so many complaints about the switch that, to appease local viewers, TBS granted an upstart promotion an early Saturday morning time slot so that the local stars could still be seen there. This upstart company was called Championship Wrestling from Georgia. This program, along with Bill Watts's Mid-South Wrestling, easily surpassed the ratings for the WWF broadcast. The steep decline in ratings for the Saturday evening time slot, and viewership clamoring for GCW's return, began to make the WWF's move a money-losing one. Eventually, McMahon cut his losses and sold the time slot to Crockett for $1 million. This chain of events and McMahon's refusal to sell to the network, Turner, instead, were critical in Turner's later decision to purchase Jim Crockett Promotions, and form the WCW promotion in its wake. An extra sense of urgency was added to Crockett's national expansion ambitions when, after Frank Tunney's death, his Toronto promotion joined forces with the WWF. If Crockett wanted to run shows outside the Mid-Atlantic states now, he would have to either find other willing partner promoters, or buy them out. This period also marked Crockett's first attempt to create a national federation. Crockett and other wrestling companies needed this opportunity after the WWF buyout of the Toronto territory occurred, as well as after the WWF program The War to Settle the Score aired on MTV to high ratings. Together with Vern Gunn's American Wrestling Association, Championship Wrestling from Georgia, and Memphis-based Jarrett Promotions, Jim Crockett Promotions would create Pro Wrestling USA. However, the organization fell apart in January 1986. NWA Unification. Crockett bought out Ole Anderson's GCW on April 6, 1985, and was re-elected NWA president. This was to help counter the WWF, after it became America's dominant wrestling business in the wake of the first WrestleMania. Crockett then purchased both Saturday evening TBS timeslots from Vince McMahon, thus making Crockett the outright owner of World Championship Wrestling. Crockett filled the time slot with 2 hours of original programming filmed in Ted Turner's Atlanta studios. The programming aired under the World Championship Wrestling banner, which had been adopted by GCW before its demise. As a result of the success World Championship Wrestling now had from acquiring the Saturday night time slots, Crockett was able to establish the annual summer supercard, the Great American Bash. By 1987, Crockett was elected to a third term as NWA president, and gained control of the St. Louis Wrestling Club, Heart of America's Sports Attractions, Championship Wrestling from Florida, and Bill Watts's Mid-South Sports. Despite Crockett having 6 consolidated territories under his banner and leading the NWA, JCP and the NWA were 2 separate entities, and Crockett, like all NWA promoters before him and since, was simply licensing the NWA brand name. This, despite the fact that during his reign, Crockett had an ironclad grip on the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. By this point, JCP's top contracted performer, Ric Flair, was locked in as the champion, even though he was obligated to perform title defense matches in each territory against its own chosen star challenger. Any title changes occurred between only other performers also under contract to Crockett. Crockett's rapid expansion had significant financial consequences for JCP. JCP expanded operations, and by December, had bought out upstart rival the UWF. Crockett even moved many of his administrative employees from the Charlotte base to Watts's former headquarters in Dallas. Jim Crockett, Jr., and Dusty Rhodes personally manned the Dallas office, leaving David Crockett in charge of the Charlotte branch. Bob Geigel, a former NWA president who bought his promotion back from Crockett in February 1987 through a partnership, had also withdrawn from the NWA. JCP began to run shows in new markets from coast to coast, greatly increasing travel costs and other overhead. JCP's first pay-per-view endeavor, 1987's Starrcade, was scheduled in its traditional Thanksgiving slot, but ran into unexpected competition from the WWF's inaugural Survivor Series PPV, which was scheduled to air the same night. Not wanting to possibly lose to the WWF in a direct PPV competition, Crockett decided to move Starrcade's starting time to Thanksgiving afternoon, not evening. However, the WWF threatened cable companies that if they chose to air Starrcade at all, the WWF would not offer them any future PPVs, including that year's Survivor Series and next year's WrestleMania IV. At the time, the WWF was the uncontested #1 PPV content provider in America, so only a handful of companies committed to JCP, devastating Starrcade 87's profitability. A similar incident occurred in January 1988, when the WWF scheduled the first Royal Rumble special on the USA Network to air directly against JCP's Bunkhouse Stampede. Once again, The WWF had succeeded in cutting into the buy rate of a JCP pay-per-view show. As a result, Crockett aired the first ever Clash of the Champions, featuring a PPV quality card, on free TV, basic cable, March 27, 1988 on TBS. In an attempt to draw viewers away from WrestleMania IV, which took place that same night. This was one of the few tactics to actually work for JCP in its war with the WWF, as WrestleMania IV's buy rate was much lower than the prior year's Survivor Series had been. However, Clash of the Champions was now the only thing Crockett could use to keep the NWA alive, though it was not even as highly watched as the WWF's Saturday Night's Main Event. On the verge of bankruptcy, Crockett sold Jim Crockett Promotions to Ted Turner in November 1988, and the promotion was formally renamed World Championship Wrestling. Demise. The eventual downfall of JCP, leading up to its eventual sale to Ted Turner, can be attributed to several key factors. Magnum TA, one of JCP's top babyfaces, and the performer scheduled to become NWA World Heavyweight Champion at Starrcade 1986, was severely injured in a car accident over 2 months before Starrcade, and could never wrestle again, so JCP had to major heel Nikita Koloff into a face on October 25. to take Magnum TA's place while still being able to have a profitable build-up to Starrcade's main event. JCP alienated loyal fans in the Carolinas by moving Starrcade 87 and the Bunkhouse Stampede to arenas in Chicago and New York City, respectively. JCP had no real history and market presence in either of these non-southern metro areas, and its ability to drawing sell-out crowds for arena shows in the Southeast eventually suffered, as some local fans vindictively withheld their support. Booking decisions also factored into the promotion's downfall. JCP flushed away a potentially profitable angle following the acquisition of Bill Watts' UWF, by having their superstars bury, instead of appear competitive with the UWF's talent, and treating the UWF's championships as second-rate to the NWA titles promoted by JCP. Meanwhile, mid-carder Ron Garvin beat perennial champion Ric Flair for the NWA World title. Although Garvin was booked to be a babyface, fans did not find Garvin credible enough challenger to be a serious threat to Flair. JCP apparently neglected to monitor its own lavish spending, as well. Crockett flew himself and his top performers around in an expensive private jet. In addition to the expense of Crockett's personal jet, there were other extravagant purchases such as the limousines provided for various wrestlers and regular business parties held by officials throughout JCP's regional offices. In addition, as previously mentioned, with the large amount of capital needed to take a wrestling federation on a national tour, Crockett's aggressive territorial acquisitions had seriously drained JCP's coffers. Compounding the issues that came with expansion was a lack of investing in the kind of marketing needed to make it successful. As mentioned, major cards such as Starrcade and the Bunkhouse Stampede did not draw as well when moved out of JCP's traditional territory. According to Dusty Rhodes, JCP failed to gain the national name recognition that McMahon achieved with the World Wrestling Federation. Rhodes also pointed out that with the WWF's success, McMahon was financially able to lure the top talent away from rival companies. Because of this, JCP offered many of its stars lucrative contracts, paying them beyond their actual value, to prevent them from leaving the company, too. Another factor was the fans' exasperation with the dusty finish. Due to the heavy overuse of this uncreative and predictable end-of-match sequence, JCP fans started to expect the swerve at any moment. Whenever a popular wrestler appeared to win a title match and was about to be awarded the championship belt. As a result, attendance at live shows began to fall, even at venues where JCP had traditionally drawn well or extremely well. Championships. NWA Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship, NWA Mid-Atlantic Tag Team Championship, NWA Mid-Atlantic Television Championship, NWA United States Heavyweight Championship, NWA United States Tag Team Championship, NWA United States Women's Championship, NWA Western States Heritage Championship, NWA World Six-Man Tag Team Championship, NWA World Tag Team Championship, NWA World Television Championship, NWA National Heavyweight Championship, NWA National Tag Team Championship, NWA World Heavyweight Championship, NWA World Junior Heavyweight Championship, NWA World Women's Championship,